Gateways to communication. The 10 commandments of communication are: objective for communicating. What is the reason? Are we trying to negotiate? Are we trying to persuade? Are we trying to influence? That should be very clear. Clarity in the use of language. We need not use high-tech language or flaunt verbal language in order to communicate. We need to use simple language which the other person can understand. Amount of communication. Neither too much nor too less. If sessions are jam-packed with too much of content, then people cannot assimilate what we are trying to say. Adequate medium. It could be a combination of oral, written, non-verbal. It makes the whole thing interesting. Visual. Appropriate physical conditions. If it's a very noisy atmosphere, then people will find it very difficult to concentrate and understand what we are trying to say. Listen attentively. Even when you're communicating, we also need to listen attentively because there are a lot of messages which come from the other group. Avoid unintentional communication. Our communication needs to be intentional because it has a purpose. But we may be conveying unintentional messages through our body language and other signs. So we need to be careful about that. Corroborate actions with statements. Anything that we want to say, if we can have a combination of an action along with it, like if we tell the class that all good ideas will get a clap, in that case we must ensure that whenever a good idea is there, there is a clap. Communication is a two-way process. It cannot be that we keep on talking and the other side is not able to receive what we are talking. That's where we need to get feedback time and again to see if what we are communicating is actually getting transferred to the receiver. Hone communication skills further. Every session, every communication, we must do better. How do we master communication skills? A little bit of homework is necessary before we communicate. What to communicate? That's something which we need to put down. What is the objective of this communication? How am I going to communicate? Is it going to be oral, written, presentation? Whom to address the communication? We have to write to the government authorities. Who in the government should I address the letter to? When to communicate? When should the letter reach the person? Or what are the days, when the person will be free where I can meet him with the letter? Could be that also. How often to communicate? If it is HR kind of a setup and the policies need to be informed, it could be once a year, it could be twice a year, or it could be quarterly so that people remember the policies and the rules and violations don't happen. It all depends on situation. How to get feedback? I have made a communication. I want to know what is the reaction. There's a new policy introduced in the organization. I want to know how people read the policy and how they feel about the policy. How to evaluate communication? It could be through a survey. It could be through a casual chat. But this little homework I need to do before I start the communication process. What are the gateways of communication in an organization, and how should a business organization, create a conducive environment for there is a free flow of communication? Major efforts are required to ensure that communication is two-way, so that feedback is received every time a communication is made. Strengthening communication network. Either they must have an intranet, or they may have policies which are written, documented, which are available and accessible. Promoting a participative approach whenever there is a discussion or a meeting. Promoting a participative approach so that it gives the message to people that here is a company which is open to communication. Appropriate language. Simple formal languages which will be allowed as far as any meeting is concerned. And people don't use hi-fi languages or technical languages which can put people off. Credibility in communication. If a communication has been made and the commitment is not kept, then that communication loses its credibility. Hence, any communication made in an organization should be well thought out and then made. Good listening. Good listening is a must for any good, effective communication anywhere. Selecting an effective communication channel. Depending upon what we want to convey, the channel has to be decided. If the channel is going to be an email, it could be conveying a particular policy decision, or a holiday news, or a good news, or an achievement. So the channel will depend on the message that we are trying to convey. Listening with understanding. Empathetic listening is part and parcel of effective communication. If HR managers listen effectively, or they're empathetic listeners, they might get to understand a lot of underlying problems which exist with employees. Timing of communication. Do they want to do it at the beginning of the year, end of the year, or every quarter? All these depend upon the type of communication that is being made. Sincerity. Anything which is made to make it appeal has to be sincerely done. If the company wants to convey that customerism is what it wants to follow for the year, a sincere attempt has to be made to communicate the same to all the employees. Freshness. They can't be repeating what they've been saying the last year, this year, without actually giving it much credibility last year. So fresh thoughts are welcome when it comes to communication. What are the essential attributes for communication? Purpose. If the purpose is not clear, the communication cannot be effective. Understand the process of communication. How am I going to communicate? There is going to be I'm going to communicate, who's going to receive, I need a feedback. All this is part and parcel of the process. Hence that means there has to be clarity there. Be clear about your target audience. What you say would matter a lot depending upon the audience to whom you're talking or writing to. Be well informed. If there's any topic that you're going to talk about, you should know about the topic well before you talk. Plan your communication. When do you want to do it? Which day? What time? Where? What? When? How? Is important. Be positive in approach. I think a positive attitude always helps. Avoid extreme feelings. Whenever we're making a communication, be professional. We need not bring in our personal feelings too much into anything. Be sincere. Sincerity is appealing. We've already discussed that. Be consistent. We cannot start with something and end with something just because there are some questions that we want to avoid or somewhere something has gone wrong. That's not okay. Unless we plan our entire presentations well and bring in a consistent message, the communication will not be effective. Appreciate the time factor. Stick to time. Time is valuable and time needs to be respected. Use proper modes and channels. You may use a letter form, an email form, or a document form. It could be any form, or it could also be a lecture, it could be a presentation. But decision to use any of this will depend upon the message and the audience. Be cost conscious. If I want to put an advertisement, I should think whether it will be newspaper or whether it's going to be on the cinema screen or it could be on the radio channel, and the costs vary. So these are considerations that we need to take since we are in business. Obtain feedback. Whenever a communication is made or an advertisement given, we need to know whether it worked. Did that communication meet its purpose and objective? If not, at least next time we need to make corrections. Avoid communication overload. Too much of information in a very short time, too much of writing in one ad is avoidable because the message gets cluttered and there is lack of clarity.